Imagine this. It's the dead of winter in 1633, deep in the frozen wilderness of New France, where temperatures plunge to bone-chilling lows that could kill a man in hours if he's not prepared. And here's this French Jesuit priest, Father Paul Le Jeune, deciding to ditch the relative safety of his mission house in Quebec to live in a simple Native American wigwam with a Montagnier family, a structure made of bent poles covered in birch bark and animal hides that everyone back home in Europe would laugh at as a flimsy tent doomed to collapse under the first heavy snow. But wait, as the blizzards howl and the mercury drops to levels that freeze rivers solid, this so-called primitive shelter not only keeps him alive but stays astonishingly warm. Reportedly up to 45 degrees Fahrenheit warmer inside than the drafty log cabins the European settlers are huddling in nearby. Why ice forms on the walls and families burn through wood, like it's going out of style just to avoid frostbite. And you're probably thinking, how on earth did that happen? Was it magic or some forgotten genius of survival? Well, stick around because this true story from the pages of history isn't just about beating the cold. It's about a clash of worlds, humility in the face of nature, and lessons that could still save lives today in our modern age of heated homes and insulated jackets. Back in the early 1600s, European explorers and missionaries like Le Jeune were pouring into North America, full of ambition to claim land, spread Christianity, and build a new world. But they quickly learned that the harsh Canadian winters were no joke, with snowdrifts piling up to rooftops and winds that cut through like knives. And many settlers perished in those first years because their log cabins, pieced together from felled trees with chinks stuffed with mud or moss, let in drafts that sucked the heat right out, forcing them to keep massive fires roaring day and night, which meant constant chopping and hauling wood in deadly conditions. And even then, the warmth barely reached the corners of the room, leaving toes numb and illnesses rampant. But the indigenous peoples, like the Montagnier, now known as the Innu, had been thriving in this environment for centuries. Their wigwams engineered with a dome shape that shed snow easily and trapped heat from a small central fire, insulated with layers of bark that breathed just enough to avoid condensation while blocking the wind. And Le Jeune, a determined 42-year-old priest, fresh from France, saw this as his chance to immerse himself in their language and culture to better convert them. So, against the advice of his fellow Jesuits who warned he'd freeze to death or succumb to the savage way of life, he joined a hunter named Pierre Pestadiquin and his family in their winter camp, stepping into a world where survival wasn't about conquering nature but harmonizing with it. And as the first storms hit, he began to realize that what looked like a humble hut was actually a masterpiece of thermal efficiency, with the low ceiling and curved walls creating a natural convection that circulated warm air evenly. And the family huddled together, adding body heat that made the space feel cozy, even as the outside world turned to ice. But as the weeks turned to months, Le Jeune faced trials that tested his faith and endurance, from the constant smoke that stung his eyes to the cultural shocks that made him question everything he knew. And just when he thought he might not make it, something incredible happened that proved the wigwam's superiority in ways no one expected. Because the real twists are coming up. Le Jeune's days in the wigwam were a far cry from the structured life he'd known in Parisian seminaries, where warmth came from stone fireplaces and thick wool blankets. But here, in the snow-covered forests along the St. Lawrence River, he woke each morning to the crackle of a modest fire built in a shallow pit at the center, fueled not by endless logs but by carefully selected dry wood, and even dried animal dung when trees were scarce. And the flames didn't just provide light and a place to cook dried meat or cornmeal porridge, they radiated heat that the birch bark walls absorbed and slowly released back into the space, creating a steady warmth that hovered around 50 degrees Fahrenheit inside, while outside it dipped to single digits or below, a difference that historians later estimated could reach up to 45 degrees compared to the settlers' log cabins, where the straight walls and high ceilings let heat escape straight up the chimney, forcing families to burn twice as much fuel and still shiver under piles of quilts. And Le Jeune noted in his detailed letters, later published as the Jesuit Relations, how the Montagnier family's close-knit, living sharing meals, stories, and even sleeping platforms lined with soft furs like beaver and bears generated enough collective body heat to make the wigwam feel like a living, breathing cocoon against the cold, with no icy drafts sneaking through because the overlapping bark sheets were sealed with pine resin and mud, flexible enough to withstand wind without cracking like rigid logs might. And he marveled at how the small entrance, covered by a heavy hide flap, minimized heat loss while allowing just enough ventilation to clear smoke through adjustable hole at the top. A design so efficient that modern architects today study it for eco-friendly buildings. But it wasn't all comfortless and struggled with the cultural divide, like when the family coated their skin with bear grease to lock in warmth and repel moisture, a practice he found repulsive at first but admitted helped prevent chapped skin in the dry air. And he endured hunger when hunts failed, relying on stored pemmican made from pounded meat and berries, yet through it all, he witnessed the Montagnais resilience. Their children playing games in the snow, without complaint. Elders sharing wisdom around the fire about reading animal tracks or predicting storms. And as February's deepest freezes set in, with blizzards burying the landscape and isolating camps for days, Le Jeune's own health teetered on the edge, his European clothes proving inadequate against the chill, until he adopted native moccasins lined with fur and layered hides, worn first side in for maximum insulation, which kept feet warmer than any boot from France. And in one harrowing episode, when a storm trapped them for a week, the Wigwam's dome held firm under feet of snow, while he heard tales from traders of settlers' cabins collapsing or their occupants suffering frostbite, making him ponder if the civilized ways were truly superior. But just as spring's first thaw whispered hope, a crisis struck that threatened everything. Stay tuned to find out how it all unfolded. In the end, Father Le Jeune emerged from that brutal winter, not just alive but transformed, having survived conditions that claimed many European lives that season, with the Wigwam's ingenious design proving its worth time and again by maintaining that remarkable 45-degree edge in warmth over the log cabins, thanks to its compact size that required less fuel to heat. The natural insulation from bark and hides that trapped heat without the gaps common in chinked logs, and the communal living that amplified every bit of warmth from fire and bodies alike. And in his writings, he grudgingly acknowledged the Montagnais wisdom, though tinted with his missionary bias, describing how their shelters allowed entire families to thrive where solitary settlers faltered, a lesson that echoed through history as more Europeans adopted native techniques like snowshoes and fur clothing to endure. And this story is in Dutch to footnoted S, a testament to indigenous innovation that modern survivalists recreate wigwams for their efficiency in extreme cold, reminding us that sometimes the simplest solutions, born from thousands of years of trial and error, outshine our high-tech gadgets. And as the snow finally melted in April 1634, Le Jeune returned to Quebec with a deeper respect for the people he sought to convert. His accounts inspiring future missions and preserving details of a way of life that colonialism would soon disrupt. But the real takeaway here is how humility and adaptation can turn certain death into survival. A message as relevant today, amid climate challenges, as it was then. If this tale of frozen defiance and cultural crossroads hooked you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more hidden gems from history that prove the past still has tricks up its sleeve. And drop a comment below sharing your own winter survival story, or what shocked you most about this one. We'd love to hear it and keep the conversation going.